The most dangerous man in any room isn't the one with a gun or the biggest muscles. It's the quiet one who knows things, who understands exactly how the human mind works and precisely where to plant the seeds of destruction. Trust me, I know. Because after 40 years of studying behavioral psychology, I became that man the moment I found my wife bent over my desk with my star pupil buried inside her, moaning about the research they were stealing from me. Before we get started, post in the comments how many years have you been married to your partner, and subscribe to the channel to hear a new story tomorrow. Let me tell you how I dismantled 2 lives with nothing but carefully chosen words and impeccable timing. After all, revenge isn't served cold. It's served with surgical precision. My name is Professor Alexander Harlow, and until 3 months ago, I was living what I thought was a charmed academic life at Westfield University. Distinguished Chair of Behavioral Sciences, author of 4 groundbreaking books on cognitive manipulation, and husband to Sophia, a brilliant former student who, at 35, was still turning heads across campus, 28 years my junior. Species and of marriage that made my colleagues simultaneously envious and skeptical. How did old Harlow land someone like her? They'd whisper. The answer was simple: intellectual connection, or so I believed. Our relationship began 9 years ago during her graduate studies. I still remember the first time she challenged one of my theories in class, standing her ground with such fierce intelligence that the lecture hall fell silent. That evening, she appeared at my office door with a bottle of wine and a stack of research papers. "I thought we might continue the debate, Professor," she'd said, those green eyes holding mine with unmistakable intent. That night crossed lines that should never be crossed between professor and student, but academia has its own unspoken rules about such matters, particularly for men of my stature. By the time she completed her doctorate, we were already living together. 3 months later, we were married in a private ceremony that raised eyebrows but few official concerns. Power and prestige have a way of smoothing over ethical wrinkles. My work on psychological influence patterns had earned me considerable acclaim, and, more importantly, substantial grant funding. Over the decades, I'd mentored dozens of doctoral candidates, but none showed as much promise as Michael Reeves, charismatic, ambitious, and possessing just enough natural intelligence to make dangerous use of others' ideas. I'd taken him under my wing 3 years ago, impressed by his enthusiasm, if not his originality. What a pathetic cliché I became. The aging professor, the younger wife, the ambitious student. The ingredients for disaster were so obvious that I should have seen it coming from miles away. Perhaps I did, subconsciously, but ego is a powerful blinder. The discovery wasn't dramatic, no lipstick on collars or suspicious text messages. It was much worse. I was searching for my latest research notes on cognitive resistance patterns when I noticed subtle changes to my file directory. Someone had accessed my private server, someone with Sophia's credentials. Most men, upon discovering infidelity, rage immediately. I'm not most men. I watched, I observed, I documented. For 6 weeks, I meticulously tracked their movements, their communications, their patterns. I installed keyloggers, recorded conversations, photographed meetings. I'm a scientist. After all, thorough data collection is second nature. There was a moment, 3 weeks into my surveillance, when I nearly lost my composure. I'd followed them to the Westfield Park Hotel after a departmental meeting, with a baseball cap pulled low and reading glasses instead of my usual contacts. I sat in the lobby behind a newspaper like some cliched detective. When they emerged from the elevator 2 hours later, Michael's hand rested possessively on the small of Sophia's back, the same gesture I'd used countless times. Something primal surged through me. Before I realized what was happening, I'd crossed the lobby and was within arm's reach of them. Michael noticed me first, his eyes widening slightly before recognition clicked. I'd changed enough about my appearance to buy a crucial second. "Professor Harlow," he stammered, his hand dropping instantly from my wife's back. What a surprise! Sophia's face showed genuine shock, not guilt, not fear, just surprise at the coincidence. Her acting skills had always been impressive. "Michael." "Sophia?" My voice remained remarkably steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "Department meeting run late?" "Alexander." Sophia recovered quickly, leaning in to kiss my cheek, the same lips that had been God knows where on Michael's. "Body minutes earlier. Michael was helping me prepare for that grant committee presentation next week. The cafe was too noisy, so we used a meeting room here." "How convenient," I replied, noting the slight flush on her neck, a telltale sign of recent exertion she couldn't control. "And productive, I hope?" "Very." Michael nodded, shifting the folder he carried to cover the unmistakable wrinkle in his pants where they hadn't been properly tucked back in. "Amateur." "Your wife's insight on behavioral response patterns is remarkable." "Yes," I smiled, making direct eye contact with him. "She has exceptional pattern recognition, notices things others might miss." For a fraction of a second, uncertainty flickered across his face. Did I know? Was this a coincidence? His doctoral training in behavioral analysis was failing him spectacularly. "In the moment. We should all have dinner soon," I continued pleasantly. "I've been meaning to discuss your upcoming symposium presentation in more detail." "That would be wonderful," Sophia interjected, subtly angling her body between us, a protective gesture toward Michael that confirmed everything. "Why don't I check our calendars tomorrow?" "Perfect." I nodded, then checked my watch. "Well, I should let you two get on with your evenings. I have a faculty senate meeting in 20 minutes. As I walked away, it took every ounce of self-control not to turn back, not to grab Michael by his lying throat and demand satisfaction like some 19th century gentleman. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and exited the hotel. The perfect picture of an oblivious academic. What emerged was far more insidious than a simple affair. They weren't just fucking. They were systematically stealing my research, repackaging my theories, and preparing to publish under Michael's name with Sophia's editorial assistance. 3 of my preliminary studies had already been repurposed. In Michael's recent breakthrough paper on persuasion techniques, the paper that had earned him attention from the Westfield Grant Committee, which controlled $1.2 million in research funding. The night I compiled all the evidence, I sat in my study drinking 18-year-old scotch, considering my options. Divorce was obvious. Academic ethics complaints certainly. But those were expected. Responses, and expected responses are easily countered by prepared opponents. No, this betrayal demanded something more. Educational. A lesson in consequences they would never forget. And I had the perfect venue, the upcoming International Behavioral Sciences Symposium, where Michael had been invited to present his groundbreaking research, my research, to the most influential minds in our field. That night, as I reviewed the audio recordings for the 3rd time, I heard the front door open and close. Sophia was home earlier than expected. I quickly locked my computer screen and poured another scotch, settling into the practiced routine of the oblivious husband. She appeared in the doorway of my study, still wearing the form-fitting dress she'd left in that morning. Her lipstick was slightly smudged, another piece of evidence I mentally catalogued. "Working late again?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe with practiced seduction. After 9 years, I knew all her moves, all her manipulations. What once seemed spontaneous now looked mechanical. "Just reviewing some committee reports," I lied smoothly. "How was dinner with Rebecca?" Rebecca, her convenient alibi friend who I'd confirmed was actually out of town through a casual social media check. Another amateur mistake on their part. "Lovely," Sophia smiled, approaching to massage my shoulders. though not as lovely as coming home to you. Her hands felt like foreign objects on my body now, each touch, once cherished, now contaminated by knowledge. You seem tense, she murmured, leaning down to kiss my neck. I could smell Michael on her, his distinctive cologne mingled with something more primal. They hadn't even bothered to shower. Something snapped inside me. Before I could process what was happening, I'd gripped her wrist, harder than I intended, and stood up, spinning to face her. "Alexander!" she gasped, genuine surprise in her eyes. "You're hurting me!" I released her immediately, horror washing over me at my loss of control. This wasn't the plan. Emotion was the enemy of precision. "I'm sorry," I said, rubbing my face. The faculty senate meeting was contentious. Budget cuts again. Another lie, delivered with reassuring exhaustion. Sophia rubbed her wrist, studying me with newfound caution. For a terrifying moment, I wondered if I'd given myself away. "You're working too hard," she said finally, the calculation returning to her eyes. "Why don't you come to bed? I can help you. Relax." The thought of her touching me, of lying with her after she'd been with him, made my stomach turn. But revealing my knowledge now would ruin everything. "I'll be up soon," I promised. "Just need to finish this section." She hesitated, then nodded, dropping a kiss on my forehead before leaving, a gesture so false it nearly made me laugh. The moment she was gone, I locked the study door and returned to my evidence compilation, hand shaking slightly as I poured another drink. That momentary loss of control had been dangerous, but also clarifying. Physical confrontation would be satisfying, but fleeting. I needed something more permanent, more devastating, something worthy of my life's work in understanding the human psyche. Sophia lay sleeping in our bed, just down the hall, unaware that I now saw her for what she was. I watched her chest rise and fall, memorizing the face I had loved for nearly a decade, now transformed into something unrecognizable by the knowledge of her deception. "Sleep well, my dear," I whispered, though not loud enough to wake her. "Enjoy these final peaceful nights." The following morning over breakfast, I maintained the perfect facade of ignorance. Sophia prepared my usual eggs and coffee, kissing my forehead before mentioning casually, "Don't forget, the symposium is in 3 weeks. Michael's presentation is on Friday afternoon." "Of course," I smiled, covering her hand with mine. I wouldn't miss it for the world. What followed were 21 days of meticulous preparation. I reached out to Dean Phillips, the symposium organizer and an old friend, suggesting a format change for Michael's session. "The research is fascinating," I explained, "but I think a panel discussion would better highlight its implications. Perhaps I could moderate, ask some probing questions to really showcase the depth of Michael's understanding." Phillips agreed enthusiastically. Michael, when informed, was visibly nervous but couldn't refuse without appearing suspicious. Sophia was delighted. Her 2 men sharing the stage, one unknowingly anointing the other as his intellectual successor. If she noticed my increased workload, my late nights spent preparing, she attributed it to my dedication to Michael's success. During those weeks, their affair continued. Twice, Sophia claimed to be meeting her sister for dinner, only to spend 3 hours in Michael's downtown apartment. I have the location data from her phone, the security camera footage from his building, and audio recordings from the listening device I'd planted in his bedroom during a department gathering at his apartment the previous month. Their pillow talk was particularly illuminating. "Once this grant comes through," Michael had said, running his fingers through her hair as they lay naked on his bed, "we won't need him anymore. I'll have my own funding, my own lab. You can finally leave him." "Be patient," Sophia had replied, her voice taking on the soothing tone she often used with me. "Alexander's reputation gives your work credibility. We need him just a little longer." Michael had laughed then, a sound that echoed in my mind during sleepless nights. The old man has no idea his precious theories are funding our future. God, the look on his face when you told him you were working late to help me format citations for my paper, priceless. I listened to this recording exactly 17 times. By the 17th replay, I felt nothing at all, which told me I was ready. A week before the symposium, Michael invited me to his office to review some aspects of his presentation. The pretense was laughable. He wanted to ensure I wouldn't ask any uncomfortable questions during his moment of glory. Little did he know I'd already arranged to transform his triumph into an execution. His office was small but meticulously organized, another trait he'd adopted from me. Photos of his undergraduate rowing team displayed his athletic build, a not-so-subtle contrast to my aging physique. On his desk sat a framed picture of his parents at his master's graduation, but nothing of Sophia. They were still being careful. "Professor," he greeted me with rehearsed deference, "thank you for making time for my star pupil." "Always," I replied, settling into the chair across from him. He launched into a sanitized version of the presentation, carefully omitting the more complex aspects, the parts he couldn't possibly defend because he hadn't done the actual research. I nodded encouragingly, playing the proud mentor while noting each vulnerability, each gap in his understanding. "Impressive work, Michael," I said when he finished, "though I'm curious about one aspect, the relationship between cognitive resistance and autonomic response. Your paper touches on it, but perhaps you could elaborate?" His eyes flickered momentarily with panic before he recovered. "I'm still refining that section, was hoping to get your input, actually." "Of course," I smiled, always happy to help fill in the gaps. A knock at the door interrupted us. Sophia entered, feigning surprise at finding me there. "Alexander, I didn't realize you were meeting with Michael today. Just offering some last-minute guidance," I replied pleasantly. "How fortuitous," she said. "I was dropping off those journal articles Michael requested. The three of us engaged in academic small talk, a triangle of deception." I watched their eyes, noting the subtle signals passing between them, the microscopic tells that revealed their complicity. Under different circumstances, it would have made a fascinating case study in non-verbal communication. As the conversation continued, I deliberately knocked Michael's coffee cup with my elbow, sending dark liquid cascading across his pristine desk and onto his lap. "Christ!" he exclaimed, jumping up as the hot liquid soaked through his pants. "My God, I'm so sorry," I said, grabbing tissues from his desk. "How clumsy of me." Sophia rushed to help, her hand lingering on his thigh as she dabbed at the stain. Touch too intimate, too familiar. I pretended not to notice. "These things happen," Michael said tightly, discomfort evident in both his expression and posture. "Let me make it up to you," I offered. "Dinner after the symposium, to celebrate your presentation. My treat, of course." They exchanged a quick glance, imperceptible to most, but blindingly obvious to someone trained to observe micro-expressions. "That sounds wonderful," Sophia answered for both of them. "Perfect," I nodded, standing to leave. "And Michael, change those pants before they stain. First impressions matter at these events." As I walked back to my office, I smiled at the knowledge that their first impression at the symposium would be their last in academia. The coffee incident had been petty, I admit, a small indulgence in physical discomfort before the true psychological devastation to come. The day of the symposium arrived with perfect spring weather. The grand ballroom at the Westfield Conference Center gleamed with polished surfaces and academic prestige. 200 of the field's most respected researchers, journal editors, and grant committee members filled the seats. In the front row sat Sophia, radiant in a blue dress I had bought her for our anniversary, her eyes fixed adoringly on Michael as he arranged his notes at the podium. I took my place at the moderator's table, nodding encouragingly at my protégé. He looked confident, in his tailored suit, likely purchased with Sophia's guidance. The deception had made him bold. Dean Phillips introduced us both with appropriate fanfare, emphasizing Michael's innovative approach and my legendary mentorship. The audience applauded politely as Michael began his presentation, outlining the revolutionary framework he had supposedly developed for understanding persuasive communication under psychological duress. For 40 minutes, I watched him present my work, my life's work, with practiced confidence, slides containing my diagrams slightly modified, data from my experiments recontextualized, conclusions I had reached after decades of research, presented as fresh insights from a brilliant young mind. When he finished, the applause was enthusiastic. Several prominent researchers were nodding appreciatively. The grant committee members looked impressed. Sophia beamed with pride from the front row. "Thank you, Dr. Reeves, for that fascinating presentation," I said, my voice carrying clearly. Through the ballroom, as the applause died down. "I'd like to begin our discussion with a few questions to help the audience fully appreciate the depth of your work." Michael nodded eagerly, still riding the high of his apparent success. "Your framework proposes that cognitive resistance follows a pattern of escalation when confronted with persuasive pressure," I began. "Could you elaborate on how you identified this pattern? Perhaps walk us through the experimental design that led to this discovery?" A simple question, a reasonable question, but I knew what Michael didn't, that this particular aspect of the research had never been included in my notes. It was a conclusion I had reached, but never documented based on 30 years of clinical observation. Michael hesitated just briefly. "Well, the experimental design was multifaceted. We used a combination of cognitive stress tests and linguistic analysis to identify resistance patterns." "Fascinating," I replied. "And what specific linguistic markers did you track? I'm particularly interested in how you distinguish between genuine cognitive resistance and simple disagreement." Another hesitation, longer this time. Michael glanced at Sophia, whose smile had frozen slightly. "We focused primarily on non-verbal indicators," he improvised. "Micro-expressions, pupil dilation, that sort of thing." The audience couldn't see it yet, but I was leading him into a trap. Each question purposefully targeted aspects of the research that couldn't be gleaned from stolen notes, the kind of deep understanding that only comes from actually conducting the work. "Interesting approach," I nodded thoughtfully. "That leads me to wonder about your control methodology. When measuring pupil dilation as an indicator of cognitive resistance, how did you account for variable lighting conditions affecting the measurements?" Michael swallowed hard. We both knew he had no idea what the appropriate control methodology would be. He hadn't done the research. "We maintained consistent environmental conditions throughout the trials," he managed. I smiled encouragingly. "Of course. And what were those specific conditions? I'm curious about the illumination standards you established." The room was still attentive, but subtle shifts had begun. A few furrowed brows among the senior researchers, a whispered comment between two journal editors. "Standard laboratory conditions," Michael replied, a bead of sweat now visible on his temple. "I see. Moving to your data analysis then," I continued relentlessly. "Your third conclusion suggests a correlation between resistance duration and subsequent persuasive success. The statistical significance you reported was quite impressive. Could you walk us through the specific regression model you used? I'm sure many here would benefit from understanding your analytical approach." This time, Michael's pause was unmistakable. He had no idea what regression model would be appropriate because he had never analyzed the data. He had simply copied my conclusions. "It was a modified Bayesian model," he attempted, using a term he'd likely heard in statistical methods courses. I nodded as if this made perfect sense. Interesting choice. And how did you address the multicollinearity issues that typically arise with that model in this context? The question was deliberate nonsense, a test to see if he would admit ignorance or pretend knowledge. We controlled for those factors in the initial experimental design, Michael replied, choosing pretense. A low murmur ran through the audience now. The deception was becoming apparent to those with genuine expertise. I caught the eye of Professor Zhang from Harvard, who had literally written the textbook on statistical methods in behavioral research. Her expression had shifted from interest to suspicion. "One final question before we open to the audience," I said pleasantly. "Your paper references a proprietary assessment tool for measuring cognitive flexibility under duress. Could you share a bit more about the development of this tool? Perhaps the validation studies?" This was the killing blow. There was no such tool mentioned in my notes because it didn't exist. I had invented the reference on the spot. Michael's face paled visibly. "The tool is still in development. We're preparing a separate paper on its validation." "How curious," I replied, my voice still pleasant, but carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "Because I've spent 30 years searching for such a tool without success. I'd be fascinated to learn how you developed it in just 3 years as a doctoral candidate." The silence in the room was absolute. Every eye moved between Michael and me as the implications became clear. "In fact," I continued, "I find myself fascinated by several aspects of your research, Dr. Reeves. The identical conclusions to unpublished work in my private files. The statistical results that match my preliminary findings exactly, down to the second decimal place. The theoretical framework that precisely mirrors notes from my upcoming book, a manuscript that only my wife has had access to." Michael's eyes darted to Sophia, who had gone completely still in her front row seat. "Professor Harlow," Dean Phillips interjected uncertainly from the side of the stage. "Perhaps we should—" "One moment, please, Dean," I said without looking away from Michael. I believe Dr. Reeves was about to explain how his research so perfectly anticipated work that I haven't even published yet. Work that exists only on my private server, a remarkable coincidence, wouldn't you agree? The murmuring had grown louder. Michael stood frozen at the podium. "Or perhaps," I continued, "my wife would like to explain how her access credentials were used to download my research files on 17 separate occasions over the past 4 months. Precisely the files that form the foundation of this groundbreaking presentation." All eyes turned to Sophia, whose composed facade had finally cracked. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Alexander," she began, her voice shaking, "this isn't the place." "On the contrary," I interrupted, my voice still eerily calm, "this is exactly the place. Among peers who understand the seriousness of academic theft, who recognize the violation of both professional ethics and personal trust." I turned to address the audience directly. "My apologies for this unusual panel format, colleagues, but I believed it was important that you see firsthand the extent of this deception before Dr. Reeves potentially received grant funding based on stolen work." The room erupted in whispers. Michael remained paralyzed at the podium, his career disintegrating before his eyes. Sophia stood rigid in the front row, her face a mask of shock and dawning horror. With deliberate movements, I opened my briefcase and removed a folder. "For those interested, I've prepared a comprehensive documentation package. It contains evidence of the unauthorized access to my research server, timestamps matching the development of Dr. Reeves' supposed breakthroughs, and audio recordings that I believe clarify the nature and intent of this plagiarism." I handed the folder to Dean Phillips, whose expression had transformed from confusion to grave concern. "The recordings are particularly enlightening," I added. "They include several intimate conversations between Dr. Reeves and my wife discussing How they would use my research to secure independent funding before, as Dr. Reeves so eloquently put it, getting rid of the old man once and for all. A gasp rippled through the audience. Michael finally found his voice. You recorded us, he stammered, his academic concern immediately revealing his guilt, not a denial of the allegations, but outrage at being caught. Yes, I replied simply. In your bedroom, your office, and several hotel rooms. The West Inn downtown has surprisingly good acoustics, by the way. Sophia's face drained of color as she realized the full extent of my knowledge. Alexander, she whispered, but seemed unable to form any further words. I turned back to the audience, many of whom were now openly staring in shocked fascination at the academic and personal drama unfolding before them. I believe we've covered the substantive research questions, I said calmly. Dean Phillips, perhaps we should move to audience Q&A. I imagine our colleagues have some pressing questions about research ethics and proper attribution. The aftermath was as swift as it was devastating. The Ethics Committee convened an emergency session that same evening. By morning, Michael's doctoral candidacy was suspended pending a full investigation. The grant committee publicly withdrew his application from consideration. 3 journal editors in attendance immediately flagged his previous publications for review. Sophia didn't return to our home that night, or any night after. She sent a friend to collect her belongings the following week while I was teaching, but that wasn't our final encounter. 3 days after the symposium, as I was leaving my office well after midnight, I found Michael waiting in the darkened parking lot, leaning against my car. His normally immaculate appearance had deteriorated dramatically. Unshaven, disheveled, eyes bloodshot from either lack of sleep or excessive drinking. Possibly both. Professor, he slurred, straightening as I approached. The great Alexander Harlow. I stopped several feet away, assessing the situation. His body language suggested agitation, his right hand concealed in his pocket. Michael, I acknowledged calmly. I think we've said all that needs to be said. No, he laughed bitterly. No, we've just begun the conversation. He pulled his hand from his pocket, revealing a flask rather than the weapon I'd momentarily feared. He took a long swig before continuing. You destroyed my life. You destroyed your own life, I corrected. I merely revealed the truth. The sure truth, he spat. The truth is, you're a controlling old man who couldn't stand that Sophia wanted someone else, someone younger, someone with original ideas. I couldn't help but smile at that last claim. Original ideas. Michael, you don't have an original thought in your head. That's why you stole mine. He lunged then, faster than I anticipated, grabbing my lapels and slamming me against the car. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs, my briefcase clattering to the pavement. She loved me, he hissed, his face inches from mine, breath heavy with whiskey. She was going to leave you. Then why didn't she? I asked calmly, despite my racing heart. Why play the charade at all? Because she needed my name, my reputation, my connections, just like you did. His grip tightened momentarily, knuckles white with fury. For a second, I thought he might actually strike me. Part of me almost wanted him to give this confrontation the physical dimension it had been building toward. Instead, he released me suddenly, stepping back as if burned. She won't even see me now, he said, voice cracking. Won't take my calls. Says we're toxic together. Smart girl, I replied, straightening my jacket. Always knew when to abandon a sinking ship. That did it. His fist connected with my jaw before I could react, sending me sprawling against the car. Pain exploded across my face, metallic blood filling my mouth where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. That's assault, I stated flatly, tasting blood as I spoke, on university property. Shall I call campus security, or would you prefer the police? Michael stared at his own fist in apparent shock, as if surprised by his action. Then, at me, the man he'd just struck, the man who had methodically destroyed his future. "You've taken everything from me," he whispered. "No, Michael," I said, retrieving my phone from my pocket. "I've given you something invaluable, a lesson in consequences, one you clearly needed." I dialed campus security, maintaining eye contact. As I reported an assault in the faculty parking lot, Michael didn't flee. He simply sank to the curb, head in his hands, defeated in every possible way. Security arrived within minutes. I declined to press charges. Magnanimity is so much more devastating than retribution, but insisted on a restraining order. As they escorted him away, I felt no satisfaction from the physical confrontation. It was messy, uncontrolled, primitive. My carefully orchestrated academic execution had been infinitely more satisfying. The following day, my lawyer informed me that Sophia wouldn't contest the divorce on any grounds, a wise decision, given the evidence I possessed. The bruise on my jaw raised questions among colleagues, which I deflected with vague references to a clumsy accident. The truth would only create unnecessary complications. 2 months later, I received final confirmation of my victory. Michael had been expelled from the doctoral program, with his academic reputation in tatters, unhireable in any respectable institution. Sophia had moved to her sister's home in another state. Her career in academic publishing effectively over after multiple universities received anonymous packages containing evidence of her role in the plagiarism scheme. The divorce was finalized. With minimal fuss, I kept the house, my retirement accounts, and most importantly, full rights to all my research. The faculty gossip eventually subsided, replaced by a new respect tinged with wariness. No one would dare cross Alexander Harlow, the man who destroyed 2 careers with nothing but carefully chosen questions. I thought the chapter was closed until Sophia appeared at my door one rainy evening in late October. "You look terrible," were my first words to her. It wasn't cruelty, just observation. The sleek, confident woman I'd married had been replaced by someone hollow-eyed and diminished. She'd lost weight, her designer clothes now hanging loosely on her frame. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. She entered cautiously, like a burglar returning to the scene of a crime, eyes darting around the foyer as if searching for traps. "I'm not recording this, if that's what you're worried about," I said, closing the door behind her. "There's nothing left to document," she nodded, following me to the living room, but declining to sit when I gestured to the couch. "I've been offered a teaching position," she said finally, "in California, small college, nothing prestigious." "Congratulations," I replied neutrally, "though I imagine they don't know about your extracurricular activities." "They know," she said, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "I told them everything, the affair, the plagiarism, all of it. That surprised me. Genuine contrition hadn't been part of my calculated aftermath. Bold strategy," I acknowledged. "And they still want you?" "On probation, with strict oversight. It's more than I deserve." She paused, fingers twisting nervously. "I need a letter." "A letter? From you?" "Not supporting me, I wouldn't ask that. Just confirming that I've acknowledged what happened, that I'm not denying responsibility." I laughed then, a sound so foreign in this house that had been silent for months that it startled us both. "Sophia, I destroyed your career, exposed your affair, and publicly humiliated you. And now you want me to help you rebuild." "Not help me," she corrected. "Just don't actively prevent it." "Why should I do anything for you?" I asked, genuinely curious about her reasoning. "Because you've won, Alexander," she said simply. "Completely and totally. You've had your revenge. This isn't about me deserving another chance. It's about whether you need to keep punishing me." I studied her face, once so beloved, now like looking at a stranger. "And Michael? Are you still in contact?" "No," she whispered. "He's not doing well. Last I heard, he was living with his parents, working at their hardware store. He blames me as much as he blames you." I moved to the bar and poured 2 drinks, handing one to her. She accepted it cautiously. "Did you ever love me?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. It had no academic value, no strategic importance, pure emotional indulgence. She didn't answer immediately, taking a sip instead. "Yes," she said finally. "In the beginning, very much. Your mind was intoxicating. The way you understood people, saw through them. I'd never met anyone who could read others the way you could." "Until you realized you could use that talent," I observed. "Things changed," she admitted. "Not all at once, but over time, yes, I began to see your knowledge as currency rather than connection. And with Michael, was that love?" She looked down at her glass. "Lust, mostly. Excitement. The thrill of having someone want me purely physically, not just intellectually. He made me feel young." "I see." I sipped my scotch, the familiar burn a welcome distraction. "And the research theft? Was that his idea or yours?" "Both," she admitted. "I mentioned something about your new cognitive resistance findings. How revolutionary they were. He said no one would notice if he incorporated some of the early concepts, just a paragraph or 2 at first, then it became more." I nodded, processing this confirmation of what I'd already deduced. "I'll provide the letter," I said finally, "not because you deserve it, but because continuing to obstruct you serves no purpose for me. My research on vindictive behavior indicates diminishing returns after optimal punishment." Relief washed across her face, quickly replaced by wariness. "Thank you," she said cautiously. "I don't expect forgiveness." "Good," I replied, "because that's not what this is." She finished her drink and set the glass down carefully. Before leaving, she paused at the door. "You know what the saddest part is, Alexander? You were right about everything except one thing. You thought I was manipulating you from the beginning, that everything was calculated. But it wasn't. I really did fall in love with your mind first. Sometimes I think if you'd seen me as a woman first and a student second, things might have been different." I said nothing, holding the door open for her final exit from my life. "Goodbye, Alexander," she said softly. "Your letter can go to this address." She handed me a business card with California contact information. After she left, I returned to my study and pulled out a notebook. I recorded the entire interaction, analyzing her body language, word choice, emotional appeals, old habits. Then I wrote the letter, careful to make it factual but not vindictive. My final act of connection to the woman who had shared my bed, my home, and ultimately my research. Some nights, sitting alone in my study with a glass of scotch, I reflect on whether my revenge was disproportionate to their betrayal. Whether I could have found a path that caused less destruction. Then I remember Michael's voice on the recordings. "The old man has no idea his precious theories are funding our future." And Sophia's reply, "Be patient. We need him just a little longer." No, the punishment fit the crime perfectly. They sought to use me, to steal my life's work, to discard me when I was no longer useful. Instead, I taught them the most valuable lesson of all. The quiet ones are always the most dangerous, especially when they know exactly how the human mind works. 6 months after the symposium, I attended a conference in Boston. After my keynote address, a young academic approached me, bright-eyed, enthusiastic, clutching my latest book. "Professor Harlow, your work on influence patterns has transformed my research," she gushed. "Would you mind signing this?" As I inscribed my name, I noticed her wedding ring and her colleague watching from across the room, her much older colleague. "You enjoying the conference?" I asked casually. "Very much," she smiled, "though not as much as working with Professor Daniels." She nodded toward the older man. "He's been an incredible mentor." "I'm sure he has," I replied, returning her book. "Tell me, what aspect of my work interests you most?" "Your theories on cognitive manipulation through incremental trust building," she answered without hesitation. "The way you map the escalation patterns is brilliant, though I've been exploring some potential applications that weren't in my published work." I finished for her. She blinked, momentarily flustered. "Well, yes, how did you know?" I smiled, perhaps a bit too knowingly. "Just a hunch. Perhaps you'd like to explain these applications over coffee. I'm always interested in fresh perspectives." Her eyes brightened as she glanced back at her mentor, who nodded encouragingly. Another academic Pygmalion, another potential Sophia in the making. As we walked to the conference center cafe, I wondered briefly if I should warn this Professor Daniels about what might be developing under his nose. But why spoil the lesson? Some things must be experienced firsthand to truly understand the consequences. After all, I didn't just study psychological manipulation for 40 years, I mastered it. And perhaps in my own way, I was still teaching, one carefully orchestrated lesson at a time.